Welcome everybody to Blue Rain Gallery podcast. Today in the studio we have fantastic, extraordinary landscape artist, Kathryn Stedham. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
It's nice to have you. It's taken us a long time to do it, so that's nice. So Kathryn, I always start everybody off with the beginning of our journeys. I'd like you to say or tell us where you were born or were you raised and any influences in your early childhood. We want to talk a little bit about the evolution, your journey into painting. Maybe talk about your travels and all the wonderful things you've done in your life.
I was born in Seoul, South Korea in 1969. I grew up mostly in the Mid-Atlantic area, Norfolk, Virginia. So I spent a great deal of time with my grandparents growing up, and they lived in South Georgia. And my grandfather was kind of a tinkerer, but he mostly made furniture, and he did toll painting, the old school kind of painting on furniture type of thing, and also sign painting. Oh. And so he was my early introduction into oil painting, and it actually happened quite young. I think I was like 4 years old, and he opened some cap of oil paint, and I remember hitting my senses, the smell of oil paint. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it never changed. It was like an affinity from the get-go. So I started out doing art with him from a very young age, and they're kind of, my dad was out of the military. He was actually in Korea when I was born there, and that's what we were doing there. But he worked for a company. Back in the day, you work for a company and you'd work there for 40 years. So it was like a company, flowers baking company, and he was been there for many, many years and retired. My mother was a landscape designer. She worked for she worked for Jack Nicklaus, golf courses, and she had her own flower business, wholesale flower business, that kind of thing. She was really successful in that area. So I grew up sailing and doing that. And so what happened? A couple things happened with sailing. Is my parents would say, "Well, what do you want?" And I was crazy about horses because I had seen a horse someone had, and I say, "I want a horse," and I never got the horse. And so I think in my view of things, I wanted to be in the mountains and I wanted to have a horse. And my parents wanted to go sailing. And I was kind of like, I enjoyed it. And I enjoyed it even more as an adult because then I could appreciate it. But as a child, it was just something we did. It wasn't that special because my parents wanted us to do it. So as soon as I got, the first chance I got, I went running for the mountains. So I made a big shift, and at some point I ended up in West Virginia and actually rock climbing and hiking and trail running and everything, great outdoors, was in the mountains enjoying the...
When I think about Appalachia, I think about those big rattlesnakes that live out there, man, because they're huge.
There's some big timber rattlers.
Those timber rattlesnakes, man. Freaking...
They're beautiful.
They are, and then you get bit. Anyways.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. So you had some experience on the outdoor life. You wanted to get to a horse someday, maybe? Is that how it was? Maybe aspirational?
Yes. I kind of lost sight of that dream because I actually wanted a horse, and we did actually have property at one point when I was young for a horse. And the story goes in my family is I wanted a horse, my sister wanted a horse. Instead, we got 2 cows.
No.
So go figure.
What kind of cows?
I don't remember. They were, about clothes. I know.
Ones?
I remember they were just black and white cows. I was young, but anyway. So we did have a little farm when I was growing up, and then we moved to Virginia, and then that's when we started sailing. And my parents really never looked back from that. I attribute though sailing to a large part in how I see when I look at the landscape, even here, is growing up on the ocean. There's nothing like it. It's kind of enjoying the vastness of it all. These large skies. In fact, I never really felt at home again because I moved to the mountains for a while. I lived in West Virginia. I lived in a variety of places until I came west. And when I moved west, I moved in 2005 actually to Utah. And I fell in love with the
Salt Lake Valley.
I started out in Salt Lake. It didn't last very long. I ended up in Park City for the most part. Right. So I call myself from Park City because my friends, hung out there.
Kathryn from Park City.
Yeah, well, I liked it there. And then in 2011, I moved here. So I really felt like I finally found home because I think I moved, first of all, I didn't move to Santa Fe proper. I moved to Galisteo, which for those of you who don't know, it's like desolate landscape, and it's just infinite skies. I mean, you're exposed like, there you are, bring it on. And it felt like the ocean to me.
Is that how you would describe New Mexico light and landscapes? Based on like the ocean, compared to wherever else you've been?
Yeah.
Isn't the light here spectacular?
It's spectacular. You know, it's a really considered a painter's paradise for a reason. There's something about, they say actually it's like the clear air does something to it does something to the particulate, and the way that we see is different. And another thing that kind of is a little bit interesting about my history is that I'm actually originally from the East. And I'm used to seeing the landscape filtered through humidity, for example, or kind of mist, which made me, as a painter, kind of really sensitive to neutrals and grays. In fact, when I first came to the West, I was doing more abstract type of work. But when I started getting to landscape, people says, your color system is really different. Nobody paints like that out here.
Right.
And what I noticed is there was a lot of bright color, and I didn't know how to I didn't quite know how to use that yet. And then I gradually learned, but through that, people would say, oh, look at that beautiful neutral you've hit. Look at that, you nailed that, like, you know, that warm, soft color there. And I noticed that I felt like I had a sensitivity to some of those neutrals that were necessary to then structure the rest of the painting on. So I kind of came with that vernacular and then kind of switched it over a little bit.
That was a pretty cool journey.
Yeah. I felt like when I moved to Galisteo, it was like kind of understanding this vastness. You almost felt like you were so exposed that you were just gonna like fade away or die or something. You know, when I moved here, people said to me this thing, they said, you know, if you move to Santa Fe, it'll eat you up and spit you out if you're not meant to be here. And I said, BS on that whole thing. And I'll tell you what, the first couple of years, I was humbled because I realized there's something to constantly feeling like you're exposed. You can't hide. There's no trees. There's nothing to go into. And I felt like the sky opened up in a way that I had to like just kind of let go into it. And I think when I finally did, I figured out kind of my place in it and how to express it.
So did coming out west, is that where the transition happened into landscape? And is that because of the opening of the landscape and the skies and the light? Would you attribute it to that?
Yeah, it's I do. I felt compelled to express something about it because it's so fantastic. It's so like otherworldly. I mean, yeah, I've traveled in Japan and other countries, and there's nothing about like the kind of American Southwest and the deserts. It's spectacular. People come from all over the world to experience the light in the desert.
How would you say your landscapes differ from the average landscape painter out there? That's a tough one sometimes to figure out, right? How would you describe it?
That's a good question. You know, I think for one thing is my history. I grew up sailing and then also rock climbing, and I've traveled all over the world. And I've been in the landscape a lot. I mean, in a degree, such to the degree that when I paint a cliff face or something like that, I've been up there. You know, I've been in.
That's what I've noticed about you. Like, there's a lot of landscape artists, and they go out there and they take all their photographs and they come back. But you seem more plein air in a lot of respects, right?
Yeah.
Because you like to be out there and experience the surroundings and capture the essence of light that you're permeated with right there.
Yes. And I can anticipate too, because I used to climb, as if you're going to do a rock climb, you can look at one pinnacle that's showing at a different time of day, it's washed and you can't see it against the backdrop. Mm-hmm. I can internalize that because of climbing and looking at things. Oh. Another way is I tend to, I'm more of an interpretive painter, even though I'm a classically trained realist painter. So I'm interested in rendering the form so it's recognizable. I like that, but I like to straddle both recognizable and interpreted. And the way that I like to interpret things is, how does it feel? All of my work, or I'd say most of my work, is painted from places I've actually been. I've stood in front of each one of these scenes. So therefore, what I do is start with reference material, either plein air painting, sketch, or photographs, a number of photographs. And I paint, I kind of get the base down, and then I take the photos and reference material and put them away. And I paint the rest of the painting by memory.
Oh, right on.
And if I'm caught, what I say to myself is, what is it that compelled me to want to paint this image? and I connect with that original feeling about what was it. And sometimes these paintings will stew for years. So I don't rush back with my material and want to paint it. Like I've had some paintings that
So you like block it up and you're like, oh, I'm gonna put this away for a while? And you come back to it, or you're already slapping color and halfway through you're like,
No, it's more in the reference material stage. Like I'll do a plein air and it'll sit for a while, and I use the plein air to then paint a larger painting. And even photographs, I've had places where they're so intriguing to me that once I do the reference material, I look at it, I'm not even sure that I can paint it.
Yeah.
I say to myself, I'm not ready for this. And I put it away, and maybe I don't even think I'm going to do anything with it. And then all of a sudden, 6 years later, I pull it back out and I go, finally, my knowledge of where I need to go with meeting what the expectation is of doing the work comes together in one cataclysm. Like, bam, I got this. And I just know what to do. Whereas 6 years ago, I couldn't even have approached it.
yeah. Well, tell us a little bit more about your childhood experiences that had impact on you in your career.
Yeah. So, as we were talking earlier, I had a bit of a kind of less than conventional life as a child, and I ended up actually leaving home at a very, very young age for a variety of reasons. And so I grew up very fast, and I lived on my own. And
How old? What age?
around 15 or 16, I actually left home for good. And so that was a pretty young age for a person to be my age, going to school and running around Norfolk in the waterfront area. But it actually turned out to be a good thing, because there was a place in Norfolk, Virginia, if you're familiar, it's called the Waterfront. And off the waterfront, it's called Waterside, there's actually an artist's studios in the back, where during the day, I remember you could go in and watch the artists work. It's almost like they were kind of behind cages, I used to think. They're in there working, and you can walk and you can buy their work. And I used to go in there all the time. And I used to go in there and actually hang out until they closed, because when they closed the front part where the public came in. And basically I hung out with the artists, and they didn't know, because I was like 15 or 16, but I told them I was like 20 something, and they thought I was cool. And so I hung out with the groups of artists from being a young age. I would hang out in their studios to hear what they were talking about. I'd hear what their latest projects were. I'd see their printmaking press, and then all the antics of artists, after hours parties and things like that. So anyway, I had quite a full childhood that way. But lucky for me, I had a lot of mentors along the way. I felt like, I don't know what you'd call it, a higher power, whatever. The stars lined up such that I met people that kind of kept me on track. One of those people was Tom Crockett, who was my high school teacher.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and
so he knew your age.
yeah, I was in high school.
That's funny.
Yeah, I had quite a number. Vic Frailing is another one. I went to a school. We had a wonderful art department. I remember I used to think they treated us more like adults than kids, and it felt was a good transition for me. And they took an interest in what I was doing. And I remember one particular time, it was a very defining moment for me, was that my teacher, Tom Crockett, had actually seen me drawing in, like a little book like this, and it had like a face, and girls back in, I do like eyes and the makeup, and it's pretty articulated. Like, this is a picture of a girl right here, and he looked at that, and he kind of looked at it, and something clicked with him. And the next day he brought me 2 books, and he didn't say much, and he handed me both books, and one book was about Gustav Klimt. Gustav Klimt is basically an artist that kind of paints pretty tight line drawings, but lots of texture and patterns. So his work is all you can imagine, very detailed. The other book was Larry Rivers. The artist Larry Rivers. In the 70s, he's quite popular. He does a lot of expressionist drawings. In fact, he would take like a portrait, it'd be the opposite. It was like he'd take a portrait and he would draw somebody and he'd scribble out one eye, and there'd be one eye and half a face, because he was a real expressionist, right? Well, without saying anything, he gave me these 2 books, and he says, take them home, enjoy them. And I brought them back. I absorbed both of them, and I remember looking at Gustav Klimt. It was very interesting, I could see. And then Larry Rivers was like, there was something about it. There was something in this kind of I think it kind of aligned with probably some of my teenage angst and need to express. And there was something beyond just creating something that looked like something. It just connected. So I came back and I said, I like this book, Larry Rivers. And he, without speaking again, he took the other book away and never saw it again, Gustav Klimt. And from that moment on, he began training me. And I didn't realize it at the time. But I remember we do gesture drawing in class. And I'd have a photograph I was drawing from. In the middle of it, he started doing this thing where he'd come over and he'd see what I was doing. He'd take it away. He'd take the reference material away. He'd say, finish the rest by memory.
Oh, that's cool. So let's talk about that, your current thoughts about painting. Where are you at?
It's interesting to talk about because I think that's a process that's always evolving. Mm-hmm. And I welcome the opportunity to kind of explore my own voice in that. And although tomorrow I might say something different, mm-hmm. I think what's been important for me lately is, taking account of the viewer, because I tend to be pretty selfish actually in my work. Because people ask me, what do you paint? I actually say at this point in my career, whatever I want. And I really mean it actually. I don't necessarily paint the iconic scenes that people think like, oh, you should paint this because it's been painted time and time again. I do some of that. But I kind of paint spaces that are lesser known, but are important to me. But including the viewer in that conversation, is I want to create something that's exciting to look at. I mean, on a very formalist level. And on that note, it's interesting, I have this little dialogue in my head about like, in one sense, I'm a formalist. And what that means is I paint for the sake of painting. Like, I really just care about the paint. At the end of the day, I could say that it doesn't matter what I hang paint on. I've been painting for 30-something years. I just love paint. I love it in physical form. So in one sense, I'm a formalist. It doesn't really matter. On the other hand, I have this need to express something. And at this point in my life, what I've been kind of drawn to is creating scenes that, even though they're grand, are also intimate. That way it gives a place for the viewer to be in it, in the scene.
So you're capturing a little bit of emotion in there with your paint.
Sure. And I don't leave out details. Even though my work is not super detailed, there'll be a detail like a moon, that bridge. People paint that painting with the bridge and they leave the bridge out. But that's part of the experience of actually being there. And I think it kind of gives a sense of my confidence in the viewer to take it in and to find their place in it.
To interpret it.
Yeah, I kind of give passageways for people to be in the scene and to step in it and look around.
I see a great balance of detail and looseness in your work. It's a good balance. It's not all tight and rigid, but yet there's a lot of definition still going on in there. And it's beautiful work. And the other thing I noticed about you is that you also teach.
Yes.
How many students do you have?
Oh, right now, just a handful of students right now. I'm keeping it small, but in a normal year, I teach not just in my atelier where I have a program and I work with students on a regular basis, a weekly basis. Sometimes students will be in the program for a couple years before they feel ready to go out on their own. I also teach workshops in various other places. And when I do a workshop, I've taught as many as 25 students at one time.
Oh my gosh.
And I give demos. I really like to give demos. And my big thing that I've done is early on in my teaching career, I guess, someone says, oh, do you get paint on you and this? And I said, heck no. I
ruin all your clothes, especially in the
I know. I've learned after all these years that you get the paint on the canvas and not on yourself. And actually, when I give a demo, so my little kind of shtick is I give a demo in a dress and high heel shoes.
Oh. Well,
yeah,
nice.
and I give a demo. So people come to see my demos and they're like, wow, she really doesn't get paint on her. I don't always wear a dress, but my point is taken is like the paint goes on the canvas. I teach people systems in order to to achieve a fine work of art or whatever they're wanting to do with that, just getting the paint on the canvas.
Well, we've had a few of our clients take your classes and the pressure. You got to look at Kathryn's work. You got to check her out. Yeah. And so we appreciate those people as well.
Oh, they're great. I love having them. And I should mention that along with the teaching is that I'm actually sponsored by an artist materials company, Holbein Artist Materials. So all my paint is Holbein oil paints and a lot of their products. It was a game changer. I mean, I tell my students all the time, it matters what you're using. So anyway, I have to thank them because I wouldn't be here without them. It was a total game changer.
Yeah, people don't realize that. I mean, we have a painting come in from a collection recently, and it's probably about 20 years old, but it's like calcification started happening within the painting.
Yeah.
The whiteness was starting to apply into the landscape. And like, this doesn't look right. And sure enough, the artist's like, yeah, he's crappy paint, and has to come back and redo it. But yeah. So that's important. Congratulations on that. That's nice.
Thank you.
Well, I think we have enough for today. Thank you, Kathryn, for showing up for Blue Rain podcast.
Thank you.
And would like to encourage everybody to subscribe on YouTube and Spotify or Apple Podcast, and follow us. I think our next podcast after Kathryn will be Chris Papan, and we look forward to having more of these podcasts. Please support these artists. They are great. They've worked hard, especially like Kathryn's case, 30 years plus, right? Mm-hmm. Every day. It's a journey. Anyways, thank you again, Kathryn.
Thank you, Leroy. Thank you, Blue Rain.
Hey, on the way, hey, oh, hey, on the way, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, on the way, hey, oh, hey, on the way, hey, oh. Thank you.